Hello, everyone. How are we doing today? Welcome to our Smarter Marketing event. Today we are focusing on the topic of design thinking, why it's important and how you can apply it within your own activity. I'm Sian, I'm a director here at Bright and I'm joined today by our three panellists. So we've got Victoria, Marketing Director for the Farm Division at Informa Markets, Neil Preddy, who's a product and marketing specialist who has a very impressive roster of retail, CPG and publishing companies under his belt, and our very own marketing transformation director, Lydia. So before I pass over to our panelists and get the Q&A started, let's set the stage for what we mean by design thinking and design thinking in the marketing context. It's probably fair to say that as we headed into the 21st century, there was a shift in the way we approached design concepts, particularly with product, software, and digital applications. And I know Neil is going to have a couple of anecdotes that he may be able to share on some of that later. And more attention was being paid to understanding human goals and behaviours to design products and services built around our needs. And that's really at the root of what design thinking is, a human-centred approach to creating solutions that meet people's needs by understanding their goals, pain points, and challenges, observing how they behave and using those insights to drive business thinking. But it took a beat or two for marketing to catch up in terms of where product and software went with it. And I think with new technologies, rapidly changing buying behaviours, thank you, the pandemic and COVID, as well as the expansion of digital, we're now really seeing to start that human-centred thinking start to take root and really become a competitive advantage for marketers. And this is where I'm going to stop and hand over to our experts to tell us more. But before we jump in, if you have any questions for our panelists, please make sure you do put them in the chat. We will have time at the end to ask them your questions. But now, Victoria, Neil, Lydia, over to you guys. And I'm going to start with a really easy question. Tell us a little bit more about you and your experiences of design thinking.
Great, thank you, Sian. So, hi everyone, my name's Victoria Hardiment. I'm Marketing Director, Farmer at Informa Markets. And I've worked in a variety of marketing roles over the last 15 years. So marketing transformation roles where I've used design thinking to help enable collaboration, innovation, and customer centricity. And with my latest role, I joined the Informa Markets Pharma team last August. We're a distributed team working globally. We've got lots of new team members and we've got lots of new markets to break into. So design thinking is helping us to work collaboratively and importantly put the customer at the centre of everything that we are doing.
Great. And Neil, do you want to go next?
Sure. Thanks, Sian, and hi everyone. So Neil Preddy, I'm a consultant and advisor to startups and businesses, and have recently finished an assignment with Informa, and for a lot of my career I worked for a company called Nielsen, which helps CPG companies and retailers. And I've got, I suppose, experience of design thinking from a product and a consumer context as well as B2B, but I've also got a lot of experience of not using design thinking, which is an interesting contrast. The areas of expertise I have, if I have any, are really in the areas of buyer understanding. How do you really get empathy with your customers? And then measuring campaigns, tuning, A/B testing, those sorts of things are some of the areas. That kind of experimentation area is something where I can contribute.
Great. And Lydia, over to you.
Not so interesting as Neil's career, but no. So I'm delivery director and transformation director at Bright. So for me, I first discovered design thinking from the Strategizer books, and if you are familiar with design thinking, you probably know them. Specifically, we were really working towards a way to how to create value propositions that actually resonated within the market. So that, I think, at Bright, but for me particularly, was our first introduction to design thinking, and then from there we've expanded to use the frameworks and continue to explore how they can help to facilitate strategy and really work in a B2B environment to deliver innovative solutions, I think, to marketing that perhaps challenge the status quo a bit.
Great, thank you. So I think to kick things off, what I'm really keen to understand is how you have used design thinking to overcome some of the challenges that we often see in B2B marketing, particularly around like the rinse and repeat side of things. And maybe Neil, you can kick us off on that one.
Sure. Well, the example that comes to mind is one that I was more of an observer of than involved in. But it really gets to the point about getting a really solid understanding of your customers. So imagine you're a cattle farmer in Wyoming, and one of the problems that you face is a thing called bovine rhinotracheitis and a bunch of other diseases that might affect your cattle. And because of that, you need to get them vaccinated. You need to take care of them. There are complications because you don't do the same thing for heifers as you do for calves, as you do for bulls. There's change in regulation, and there's a seasonal element. You do different things at different times of the year. So what has that got to do with design thinking in marketing? Well, it's the problem of somebody's customer. So if you market vaccine, that has a lot to do with design thinking in marketing. And in this case, if you're trying to solve that problem, and if you're selling vaccines, you obviously want people to become aware of your vaccine, then the way that you define the problem can make a very big difference to you. And if you understand the problem from the farmer's perspective, you're very busy, you've got to remember to do things at certain times of the year. Your job is not to sit at the internet keeping up with everything, it's to be out there looking after your animals. So anyway, long story short, the answer to the problem is a really neat piece of content marketing called Build an Optimal Cattle Vaccination Routine. And that is delivered in a publication that farmers go to and trust called Farm Progress, which is owned by Informa, which is hence my involvement in the story. And it's written by someone that the farmers trust as well, by an expert. And it's written in a way that is really going to be helpful to them. It's not written to say, here's our vaccine, isn't it? It's actually giving genuine advice. And something else that the people at Farm Progress could deliver, as well as being trusted, is that they have a great database on their audience. So they know who the farmers are, how many cattle they've got, and where they are, because winter, the onset of winter, progresses from north to south, obviously at a different time, a slightly different time of the year. It needs to be delivered at different times for different farmers. If you put all those things together, you can deliver a campaign that gets to the farmer just at the point when they should be thinking about this. It gets to the farmers who need it. And the result is a win-win-win, right? Because so the farmers save costs, they have healthier livestock. The vaccine company did sell more vaccine and had a great campaign. Farm Progress helps to build its partnership as a trusted media outlet with both of those parties, and their cattle, if only for a short while, get to live slightly longer and healthier lives. So that I think is a good example of how you use that kind of customer understanding to think about things from the buyer's perspective. And it's a different answer than saying, how do I get farmers to be aware of our vaccine brand and then move them into being interested?
It's so interesting to look at it, and I think for B2B as well, always remembering that these are people, what their experiences are. And I mean, I often find as a marketer, you are sitting behind a computer, as we do all the time, and your judgment on the channels that you can use to reach the market, it has to be challenged, because you think, well, I would always download a piece of content from Instagram, but that's because I'm kind of interested in how the content runs rather than it being just a platform to target. So you can't use your own experience just to validate that. I think for me, take the question if that's all right. we often use the approach with clients who are really stuck in their thinking and they can't see beyond the constraints. So going to that point around the rinse and repeat, because, well, this is the environment I'm working within. We can't do this, we can't do that. We're getting no's all over the place. So the design thinking approach forces them to stop, to kind of look up from your everyday and really discuss the issues that are occurring and really move stuff forward. The one thing I would say is this probably sounds like any other workshop. So why is design thinking kind of different to that? My experience of it is that it really is fundamentally different because they work towards a solution focused. So if you take the Lightning Decision Jam as a good example of this, the whole process of this workshop starts out with stating the issue, then you move on to prioritizing your solutions. And at the end, you have an action plan to move forward with, rather than just another big list of all the problems. And people have sat there and discussed the problems over and over. You really are getting stuck into discussing how you can solutionize and move forward, not just, everybody likes to talk. So kind of putting that into action rather than just discussing it.
Yeah, moving from observation to action. And I think there's a good couple of sort of values that have already been highlighted in terms of the challenging of your conventions and assumptions, as well as moving into that solution mode. But I guess, where else have you seen perhaps design thinking add value to marketing outcomes? Perhaps Victoria or one of the other panelists wants to kickstart that.
Another one that I think is very useful for the importance of the way that you frame the problem as well. Because with design thinking, you want to be open to getting new and more interesting solutions, which is very important if you want to stand out. The example that comes to mind, and it's an old one, and it's the one that a lot of you will be familiar with because it's a very famous one, and it concerns two pieces of fruit called a blackberry and an apple. So if you think back to, if you can think back to 2007, if you can, and then this is a history lesson, but there was this device called a BlackBerry, which some of you will remember, which was a little device that had a little kind of interesting keyboard that had little bumps on it, which is why they called it a BlackBerry. And its function at a time when really the world was dominated by feature phones was to enable business people to get at their email when they were on the road. Right? It was a great tool. It was a very cool thing to have. Everybody wanted one. If you're in middle management, you definitely wanted to be one of these, because if you didn't, you either had a BlackBerry or you didn't, then you were in the club or you weren't in there. And that was a very good functional tool. At the same time, I couldn't find my BlackBerry, but I could find one of these. I don't know if any of you recognize that, but that's an iPod Shuffle, right? Possibly with music on. When we take it to the Antiques Roadshow, we'll find out. But that was the iPod was probably Apple's biggest product at that point in time, probably accounted for about half of their revenue. We know how things have ended up now. Actually, BlackBerry at that point was on a trajectory that was leading it 2 or 3 years later to become the best-selling mobile device in the US. And the iPhone didn't exist, but the iPhone was, shortly to be launched. But what was the difference in the way that they were framing a problem that led to them 3 or 4 years later to become kind of competitors in the market, and for in many ways the iPhone to lead to the demise of the BlackBerry? Was it that the people at BlackBerry weren't smart? No, I don't think that's the case. I think they had some very smart people, but they were thinking about this as a business tool, and they were probably asking the kinds of questions that product people do about what goes on the roadmap, and they improved the little tracker ball, and they probably improved security, and they improved the speed and the ability to sync up with them, and probably attachments would have been a big issue if I remember all that. So there was all that kind of functionality that if you say, how do you like using the BlackBerry, that's what you get. Over at Apple, they were asking a different set of questions and thinking about things very differently. They were obviously, their heritage was with creative people in business, but also with consumers. And there were two key observations that they made, because people think Apple didn't do research or didn't listen to consumers. Well, they did listen to consumers, but it was in a very particular way. And 2 key observations that they made were, one was people were starting to carry multiple devices around. So if you were one of those middle managers, chances are you also had an iPod there, and the chances are you also had a personal phone. So there you were going around with 3 devices, with all the chargers and all the stuff and the different batteries and everything that went with that. And so I thought, there's an opportunity. You could kind of bring these things together. The other thing was a very deep piece of which is where emotion comes into it. This is, I think this is Steve Jobs' term, which the ultimate pointing device, right? So something that if you'd have asked consumers, they don't know what's possible. So nobody knew you could have a touch screen. If you've gone and asked consumers, would you like a phone with a touch screen? Nobody had that capability. But that insight, when you put it together with the technical people who were very closely involved in developing the iPhone, made a big difference. So that framing of the problem, that people who are probably equally smart to very different conclusions had very different long-term outcomes. And the one that's closer to design thinking, the Apple side, was opened up a world of many more possibilities and was much more radical than where the BlackBerry people had got to. So what are some of the kind of pragmatic and practical lessons that you can draw out of that, rather, probably well told, perhaps overtold story? When it comes to talking to customers, there are 2 big problems to overcome. One is that people generally are pretty bad predictors of their own behavior. Right? Would you like to be contacted via email, or would you like to have it on Instagram, where people put something down and then they don't want it anyway? Right? Just a very simple example. And also, when it comes to kind of thinking about new things and innovation, people don't know what's possible. So does that mean you don't need to ask them questions? Well, no, you do, but you need to be smart. And I would say the practical things are observe behavior, use the data, and think of qualitative as well as quantitative. Get under the skin of people. So the importance really of the emotion and social aspects of things, as well as the functional. And something else that people neglect, which is a trick, is when, and you see this in the world of sales, right? Or when somebody loses a customer, a business will do a post-mortem. Right? When they win a customer, it's much rarer for people to have a look and say, why did we win? So sometimes asking people who've completed your sales journey, what did you like about it? What went well? What was hard? Might tell you a lot more than thinking about the people who never made it. But anyway, that's me talking for probably too long. I'll stop.
Yeah, I think this, Neil, is exactly why we're looking at using design thinking to bring in that kind of more human-centric approach. Because for the team that I work with, we have some really strong established brands, but we need to make sure we're kind of listening to and understanding what our customers need and kind of want from us, and what they don't even know they want from us, so that we can move from a set of products that people need to a set of products and offerings that people love and keep coming back to because they have that emotional connection. So that the example that you've given really resonates for us in particular.
I think that's really interesting, Victoria, particularly as you say, you're really starting that journey and some of the key motivations that you have behind that. I'd be really keen to understand, and I'm sure a lot of our audience would as well, as you're starting that journey, and I know you're very much at the beginning of that, but how are you integrating that into your marketing process? How are you helping your team? Perhaps, how is that different to how your team might have worked beforehand?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and in lots of different ways. Primarily at the moment, some workshops and the emphasis on the kind of work in the workshop. So Lydia, to your point, working together to get to be solutions focused, action orientated. So spending time together that maybe we would have spent separately, looking at research and feedback and matching that against our personas and redefining what our personas look like together, mapping messaging, products, and channels of engagement, but doing that as a group which I think is really important and actually quite different from how we may have worked before, especially as there's lots to do in marketing. There's always another thing you can be doing, so taking the time out and giving ourselves the permission to think and collaborate across team as well. So that's also really important. We're connecting with other teams, the product teams, our content teams, sales teams, to really come to these conclusions and ideas together. And we're also using jobs to be done to map against our personas, to make sure we bring it back to what do our customers really, what are they doing with us, and what jobs do they need to achieve and complete when they're interacting with our brands. I think that's really helpful to bring us back to the needs and make sure that what we're doing is focused on those customers. And then we're using retros and some agile marketing techniques to enable collaboration, but also give ourselves the permission to test and experiment, which will then hopefully give us the data to prove that a new approach, design thinking, and a different way of collaborating is really going to add value to our brands going forward. But it's all new, so we're kind of learning together, and we're taking an agile approach. So we're using design thinking as an enabler, and I'm sure if we were to speak about this again in a couple of months, we would have learned loads and changed lots of our kind of approaches and use loads more tools and techniques.
And I think that's the key thing here, isn't it? A lot of it is about experimenting, working out the right, there's so many different tools and techniques out there when we think about design thinking in the different models. So you have to experiment a little before you find what works best for you. But I'm sure, Lydia, throwing a question out to you, a lot of people are either have tested, dabbled, or to Victoria's point, are really starting to think about how they integrate it much more strategically in a structured way. But what are some of the common pitfalls that perhaps marketers can be looking out for as they're looking to adopt more design thinking in their activity?
Yeah, I think Victoria highlighted a couple of them there actually as you spoke through, but you've mentioned it being an enabler, and that's so important to consider that this is a tool. It is not the solution. It is the thing that will help you get there. It's going to help you to move forward. And I can see a sort of question pop in about ROI there. And this is all about being more effective with the marketing that you do and putting it that focus towards the customer, that focus towards the business value and what we're doing and why, and challenging yourselves up front with your planning rather than kind of waiting later down the road. And I think Alex, one of our team members, put a blog together about this actually, but there's a whole phase of the process that across design thinking. So the beginning areas where you're doing the customer insight, the bit where you're doing the ideation areas, the prototyping, so bringing up testing pieces in, and then the reflection. So making sure that you're using the right elements for the challenge, and Neil's already talked about the framing your challenge correctly, and then using the elements correctly as you go through, and not forgetting to do that reflection piece at the end. For sure, that's certainly a common pitfall, is just to kind of plow on forward without pausing to reflect on how things have impacted and improved the effectiveness of your marketing. And then I think the other one that I would touch on is again, Victoria, you've said, you brought sales into the meetings, you put different people in. Don't just do this with your marketing teams. You will create your echo chamber and reinforce your thinking with the same group of people. If you've got the opportunity to invite anyone else into these sessions, it's really important to bring out that other elements of thinking, and attract some market the marketing as well internally. I think it's great to see that marketing can be the people who can push the ideas forward and really innovate. So why not bring other people into those sessions, drive that thinking?
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point, Lydia. And I want to open this up to perhaps Victoria, you in terms of where you are, but also to the other panelists in terms of, I think, one of the biggest challenges that marketing, particularly in B2B, faced is siloed teams and misalignment, leading to doubling up on efforts, increasing time to market when you're trying to think about how you bring in the right people at the right time, or how you bring in the right skills and engage them in the activity accordingly. So how have you seen design thinking being used to break down those silos, improve collaboration and bring people together?
Yeah, I think for us, because we have a lot to communicate to our customers throughout the year, and we're distributed, and there's lots of teams involved in our marketing activities and the development of our products. Actually, I think we need to make sure that we aren't acting and working in silos and aren't doing the same thing that another team is doing or another member of the team is doing. So actually, lots of the kind of principles around design thinking are helping with that cross-team collaboration from our perspective. So using tools like Miro, for example, when we're in different locations and getting together and ideating, using the kind of retros to reflect on what's gone well, what's not gone well, bringing in our researchers to build our personas alongside our marketing team and our sales team, mapping journeys together, is all of those tools are helping with that dialogue and the cross-team collaboration. And I think the good thing for us in the kind of beginning of this journey is that actually we're thinking about who else should we include, who else is involved with working with this customer, or who has this insight, who else can we work with. So I think those steps that you were talking about, Lydia, that are in the blog are really helpful to make sure that you've got the right people involved at the right time, that you've got the right input, and that's really important for us, and it's going to change how we work and our effectiveness going forward. I also think it makes sure that we don't have any blind spots. And Lydia, you said if it's just the marketing team kind of working together, we might not be thinking about something that's really important, or a piece of feedback that one of the sales team have just had from a customer, or something that the content team are seeing that's trending from a theme perspective online. And so, yeah, the process, the ways of working is helping us to break down some of those silos.
Yeah, I would concur with that, and just taking it to a very practical level, I think, and obviously sometimes you've got to collaborate online, but when you can do it face to face, it's richer and different and better often. I think literally sometimes round tables actually, seriously, they do seem to help. But I've seen this, and I've seen this as an example in again, one of the Informa businesses, literally getting people like the marketers, the show producers, the data people, the content editorial people, and some of the sales people together to work on some of these problems. It's a very different conversation than the one that you normally have, and you get, oh, I didn't know you could do that. Oh, did you? I didn't know that. People bring their different perspectives. You learn more about the customer. You learn more about the practicalities, and out of that richer dialogue, you do get more and better ideas. And you often end up with a list of things, like, here's 3 things we can work on today, and there's another list of 8 or 9 things that we could work on in the future. It tends to be very rich, and a day spent like that can be worth a whole round of kind of online meetings. So don't underestimate the value of those different perspectives, and literally practically investing in the travel sometimes to be able to get people together.
Yeah, absolutely. We were talking about this after a session that we did in December in person, Victoria, with your team, and it was like the energy in the room afterwards, it was just palatable. Like by doing this way of working, bringing people together, just think everybody went, oh God, yeah, I do love my job actually. Like, I actually really enjoy this. I think, we all know that the market's not easy out there at the moment. Finding great people is difficult. So retaining your teams and kind of being effective in how you can deliver marketing. There are real simple things through this design thinking. We're talking about it as a big concept, but you can just take small elements of it. So another one that I'm currently love is the sailboat exercise, and it's a retrospective. And if you look at one of the templates there that you can pull out, and Miro is a great example. Mural's got some as well. What I particularly love about that is it looks at what you've done, what work you've done, how effective that work is, but then also how effective you guys have been as a team. Like, what did you enjoy? What drives and motivates you? And giving people the opportunity to be heard in that way allows so much more innovative ideas, because most of the time the marketers you've got are pretty great. So you forget to kind of tap in to the fact that they are really great and they do have some good ideas. So allowing that space to bring that together is just so valuable, not just from a ideation perspective, but also to bring your teams and align them together.
Yeah, you're so right. And I think one of the things, maybe we've touched on it, but if not, I love as well how easy it is to repurpose some of these techniques, because Lydia, you obviously just mentioned the sailboat as a retrospective exercise, but I've also seen it used as a strategy exercise, where you use it in terms of, where are you looking forward to in terms of your beacons, what's holding you back, what is, in terms of the anchor. And so there's just so many different ways that you can apply these techniques depending on the context and sort of where you're framing things. I want to make sure that we have some time to take any more questions from our audience. I know that we've had one that, Lydia, you answered as part of one of your questions. So I'll give everyone a couple more minutes to add any more questions so they come through. So I'll just put one out there in terms of to all. If there's one thing that you would recommend teams adopt or take away and get started with tomorrow, what would that be? Don't all jump in at once.
Go on, Victoria.
From my perspective, I think Neil, to your point about like face-to-face, we've got 2 days of face-to-face kind of workshops next week, focused around rebuilding our personas and then turning those personas into segments in our segmentation tool. And we're adding some fun to that. We're having a pizza party as part of our segmentation workshop, and we're going out together as a team. We're going to do some fun things and kind of bring everyone together to get to know each other better as well. So I think one thing I would say is utilizing one of the tools like a retro and building that into something that you can do face to face and have some fun, and then taking actions away from it would be the one thing that I would recommend, because I think that's working for us. And then from a tool perspective, have some kind of tool that you can use that visualizes the work that everyone's doing, and shows that what you're doing is not finished. So for us, we're using Miro, for example, for our journey mapping and personas, and I think that helps us make sure that they are not static and it doesn't feel like we've finished, we've ticked off that exercise and we're done. And I think that's also helping us think differently as well. That was 2, sorry.
I love the pizza party idea. So that's the segment, and then the toppings are the persona elements. That
so a base, and then so there's a theme, and everyone has pizza at the end of the day. So I feel that's a benefit.
Love. Yeah.
So we've had a couple more questions come through. I do want to hear what your one takeaway is, but I think maybe just because you guys have talked a little bit about frameworks and techniques, Beth has asked, where do you source your frameworks and techniques from, and how do you decide which ones you want to try?
My visual aid. So yeah, I mean, what we'll do after the session is share a reading list, because there are some really great, not just websites, but you know, books out there that you can use and you know, dip into. So this is great. It's got loads in there about how to run them, what things to do, and we are also sharing next week some kind of reframe little cards that will give you some ideas of, you know, when to use the different frameworks and techniques and which situations to use them in. So loads of resources which we'll share.
Great, go for it, Neil. I know you're ready to dive in.
Well, I mean, I source them from anywhere. You steal them, remember ones that worked when you're in a meeting, you know, read widely, dip into some of the obvious sources like, you know, the IDEO website and all those sorts of things. There's so many that you can use them, try them. You don't have to invent new ones, but you can as well. So
Yeah, I think for me, I've taken lots of ideas from like other workshops that I've been in, or working with suppliers, things that I've seen online, and kind of repurposing, adapting that to our business. So yeah, using good things that you've seen other people do, I think is a great one.
Best ideas are stolen. No, not always, but certainly helps. Okay, we've got one last question, which is, does the Design Council systemic design framework extend design thinking, or is it a different approach altogether?
well, I'm going to put my hand up and say I don't know it well enough to answer the question, so my apologies for that one.
So I think I would second that one. James, we'll get back to you.
Yeah. We'll share some commentary afterwards.
Great question though.
It is a great question. It's great when you get to stump everyone on the panel with it. Oh, food for thought there, definitely. But unless there are any other questions, we will wrap it up from there. So, you know, thank you to everyone who has joined us today and for your questions, and thank you to our panelists as well for sharing your wisdom on design thinking, the impact that it's having. You know, I think there was lots of useful tidbits and some tricks there for our fellow marketers to think about and get started with. So we will be following up tomorrow with the recording. And as Lydia mentioned, keep an eye out next week for our reframe cards, the design thinking edition. If you didn't catch the growth mindset ones, please do drop me a note and we'll share the link so you can access those as well. We're Bright, and our purpose is to give marketers the power to do great work. So if you'd like to continue the conversation with us, please drop a note in the chat and make sure to sign up for our next Smarter Marketing event, which is on the 29th of March. And it's going to focus all on experimentation and how it's helping marketers to test, learn, succeed, and really build and optimize their activity. So we look forward to seeing you there, and have a great day.